Good. So, Neil, of course, is the CEO and the founder of Replenish Nutrients. So he is the magic man behind all of this fertilizer. So, yeah, we've been working with Neil for quite a few years. I think 2019, I want to say, is the first year that I started working with Replenish Fertilizer, and at the time it was Biosol was under that umbrella as well. So I have a fair bit of experience with this product, using it on a few different farms, and I've definitely seen it work, and I'm a pretty big fan of it. So with that, Neil, if you want to, oh, I guess I got to make you co-host here, right? There we go. Make you co-host. Yes. Now you can share your presentation if you want, or I can put it up on my screen.
Yeah, you may as well put it up on your screen there, Lyle. That way we don't confuse each other.
Alrighty here.
But yeah, to start off with, yeah, I'm Neil Wiens, the CTO, CEO, Chief Bottle Washer, main mechanic. It doesn't really matter what you want to call me that day, but we're a pretty small little family over at Replenish, and all of us do everything. So, yeah, anyway, we started this company about 6 years ago, more on a basis of what I'd learned from the days of actually selling Biosol and inventing Biosol, and moved on further with Elston Solberg in the world of, hey, you know what, this sulfur thing makes a lot of difference on how nutrients are available, and so ultimately that's how we started this thing and really started understanding. I mean, I love biochemistry. I'm a very weird geek, hence the reason my little acid shirt. So it's the side where my animal nutrition background really plays a very large part in how we formulated all these products and how they actually work in the soil. So I'll get into how that is, but I think just to start the conversation, and Lyle, I think what you and I will do on this webinar is really talk back and forth, trying to get people to understand, why is there a soil health problem, and then in the other case of it all is, what does phosphorus do? How does it actually react in the soil? Why do we need to keep adding phos? Why don't we need to add phos? So on and so forth. But we'll probably focus on the phosphorus problem more than anything today, if that works for you.
Yep, absolutely. That is generally what guys are most concerned about now. A lot of our fertilizer products we've been using for the last few years with, especially on irrigation, some of the big crops we've been pulling off, we're really starting to fall behind on our phosphate applications.
Yeah, oh, for sure, for sure. And so, I think we'll start with that is, the soil health problem. Everybody's been talking about it nowadays. We hear about regenerative fertilizer. We hear about McCain's and Cavendish and Pioneer and Richardson and P&H all wanting these regenerative type products back into their system, but nobody's been able to really define it. And that's not what I'm here for today, is to define that. All I'm here for today is just talking about the soil health problem, how we got here, how do we actually start fixing it? Because it does fix pretty quick. Biology has a shelf life of anywhere from an hour to 8 hours to 48 hours. And you can go through a lot of generations in a hurry. We're not looking at the leghorn chickens we were talking a little bit earlier here, where it takes a year and a half before it starts laying an egg again. So the regeneration can happen very quick. So ultimately, I mean, what we've been sitting in there, and you can kind of roll on to the next side of it all, but really what we've done over the last 70 years, Lyle, is we came up with this wonderful synthetic fertilizer, and it really is good. Then don't get me wrong, nothing that's wrong with that is there. It's increased our production, it's done everything else. But as I keep mentioning to people, over the last 70 years, what has changed in agriculture? Anything, it's
Mhm.
basically we've got GPS, we've got new tractors, we've got new trucks, we've got new technology on how to seed, we've got new pesticides, we've got new herbicides, we've got new everything. But what hasn't changed, Lyle?
Yeah, for the most part, the fertilizer, even MES 15 is basically the same old fertilizer, just blended together, just like a co-pack of chemical with 40-year-old chemicals in it. So,
Well, there you go.
yeah.
So, that's where I kind of always question then on this is, was urea and MAP and AMS and all hit the home run day one of invention, and we haven't had to improve it? I doubt it. I think it's just because the infrastructure and everything has happened. So,
Hmm.
we've used the same product and it ends up being a salt product. And, we keep talking about salt index, and I don't think a lot of us know about what that actually means. But if you put it in a great analogy, it'd be the same thing as us going to, being on the ocean without water, but yet we want to drink the ocean water. What happens? Right?
Yeah, we end up dehydrating.
And we end up dehydrating. And so, really, that's the same thing that we're doing with chemical fertilizer. Every chemical fertilizer out there is an acid-base reaction, which I'm going to give you guys a quick, really quick bio or chemistry lesson here, just to explain how fertilizer is made. And again, we'll concentrate on monoammonium phosphate and phosphate in general. But ultimately, what you're doing is a salt index is osmotic pressure. I'm not going to go hard into anything, but what it means is basically water is moving from the higher concentration level of water to a lower concentration of water. And salt will always create that lower concentration of water because it's binding moisture. And it doesn't matter what salt does that. And so hence the reason, as you can see on the bottom of this little side of it all, is the reason we don't seed place a whole bunch of synthetic fertilizer, because we create this fertilizer burn.
Yep, and
So
it's also
that
why it's more dangerous to put a salty product in the seed row in a dry year than a wet year. You desiccate the seed.
very, very true. And it also is the reason why, let's get into phosphorus a little bit here, Lyle. I mean, what is your safety of monoammonium phosphate in the seed row besides say a canola seed? What
Oh,
is your total amount of pounds that you can probably get away with before you cause chaos?
yeah, I mean, most guys are going to be somewhere around 10% seedbed utilization, so 40 pounds of product, you'll be really pushing seed safety.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so therein lies probably why most of us actually have a phos deficiency problem as we start going on, and I explain how that actually looks in this presentation. So let's head on to the next one here.
Ready?
And so ultimately, MAP, and most of us don't know. And in fact, when I started doing this, I didn't know how MAP was made. So this isn't something that most of us know. Is most of the monoammonium phosphate and DAP made in the globe is, by, done in Florida or Morocco or North Carolina or essentially Idaho. And certain companies make this product to have the rock phosphate. So the whole way that it actually works is rock phosphate mined out of Florida or Morocco, generally, which looks like a chunk of rock. This
Hmm.
is it. This is my big prop of the day. I've got another one, but it looks like a chunk of rock. And as you can well imagine, a plant cannot deal with this. So chemistry came into play, whereas this chunk of rock has essentially about 28 to I don't know, 28 to 32% phosphate in it. 100% unavailable to the plant as it sits, because it's all bound up to, guess what? Lyle, do you have any idea what that would be bound up to?
Probably calcium.
Yeah. Calcium is one of the main ones. Iron's the other one. Magnesium is probably the number three, and then of course you got some aluminum. There's a whole whack of micronutrients that happen in this piece of rock, which you would expect, but ultimately the big four are what we always have worries about in agronomy. Because what happens when we throw monoammonium phosphate on the ground? What are we tying up into, and how long are we usually available?
Yeah, it ties up into all of our magnesium and our clay and our calcium, which, I mean, certainly in this area of southern Alberta, we have no shortage of calcium in a lot of our soils.
Yeah, fair enough. So, it's funny how we have this chunk of rock where we extract everything off of it just to go get it tied up again. So it's one of those scenarios, but I'll explain a little bit more on how they actually make it available. So, in order to make this chunk of rock, the phosphorus available to you as the farmer in the monoammonium phosphate plant, they actually grab that along with this little yellow chunk of sulfur, elemental sulfur. And elemental sulfur, when you burn it, creates sulfuric acid. That sulfuric acid is poured over the rock, extracts the phosphate out of it, and then on the other side creates a byproduct, which is all the other 70% of that rock. So that calcium, the magnesium, iron, boron, copper, everything goes into a waste pile beside their plant. Meanwhile, you have a phosphoric acid here, which you need to make. You can't, of course, go put acid on your ground. It's a liquid and it's just not very usable.
Hmm.
So the world of chemistry is they have to throw a ammonium, which is a base, onto that chunk of acid and create the monoammonium phosphate. So when they do that, that's how they actually create the 1152 that we get as our final number. Now, the biggest thing that happens with all this that nobody tells you, or very few people tell you, is when you have an acid base reaction, it doesn't matter where in chemistry, which is every chemical fertilizer, you then create a chemical salt. So 1152, what does that equal out to, Lyle?
Well, that'd be like 63%. So the balance would be salt.
Yeah. So you got a balance of 37%. That's what salt is. AMS is like what's the formula of AMS?
That's 210024, also known as super salt.
Super solid, yeah, which again, you start figuring it out at 21 and 24, you're only at 45. So that means 55 happens to be something that isn't one of those two scenarios.
Yeah.
So, we can start to understand why putting on synthetic fertilizer year in, year out on the same thing. And we can start to really understand why we start to get higher amount of salinity patches across, everywhere.
Hmm.
And I'm sure everybody on this call has seen for bigger and bigger salinity patches. And that is one of the main reasons. So we'll move on to the next one. So really that is your main problem that exists with this. Is so you have a fertilizer that has this high salt index. It does cause some degradation. Basically, the ammonium side, if you're using some ammonium sulfate, actually decreases pH, which I think in a lot of your soils is actually not a bad thing. But in the same token, it's always through a chemical process and not a biological process. And you can well imagine biological process is always at the right time, right place. When we're talking 4Rs and everything that goes on, people forget to talk about biologics in the 4Rs of nutrient management. And ultimately, biology has the best idea on when the plant needs the nutrient the most. And if we started thinking that way, no different than feeding a chicken or a pig or a cow, where, hey, that balanced diet, feeding it more during its growth period instead of during the chick period. I mean, why would you give everything that chick needs its feed on day one for a full year of feed? Most of it's going to go bad,
Hmm.
and none of it happens, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're sitting at. Ultimately that's where it is. And so when we're talking FOS and FOS deficiency, which we'll move to the next one here, Lyle, is because of this salt index, we've created a scenario where we can only put on, as Lyle said, 40 pounds of product without causing chaos. We can do a little bit more, on a side band. But at the end of the day, when we're pulling off a 60-pound canola crop, how much phosphorus are we actually taking off that field?
Quite a bit.
Yeah, it's essentially a pound per bushel. So in the world of canola, if you're doing a 50 or 60 pound or 60 bushel per acre crop, you're yanking 50 to 60 pounds of actual phos out of your sink, and this is actual removal. So if you only putting on 25 or 30 pounds, which is what we've been doing forevermore, guess what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say in my area, most guys, cereal crops, they're kind of targeting 20 to 25 pounds of phosphate. Seems to be an average application that they're trying to do with their phosphate. And then when they're rotating into canola and the recommendation calls for, say, 45 pounds of additional phosphate, guys are struggling with how to get that down.
Well, exactly, because we're going to just burn stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's seed safety, it's everything else that goes, and so it's become a scenario where you start to do these, and this is an extreme picture over there when you see the purpling on the side, and most people will likely don't see this, but what happens is phos sneaks up on you, and it's a slow grind because, of course, if you're only being deficient by another 10 pounds, 20 pounds every year, and you just keep mining that little bit every year, you never actually really see that phos deficiency. It's kind of like your kid growing up, and grandma hasn't seen him in a year, but we watch him all through the year, and you go, well, he didn't really grow at all. But grandma sees him after a full year and goes like, holy cow, did that guy ever grow? Like, what happened? And we don't see it, but if you see it, if you take a look at it from the whole holistic view from further out, you're going, holy cow, I think this is maybe what's happening in a lot of worlds of real, ultimately delayed maturity and stunted growth.
Yep, and lodging
And
as well.
oh, law, yeah, 100%. So
Mhm.
you got a variety of things that happen when you start to imbalance that side of things. Move over into a thing, a little bit of a trial, and this is where it really started hitting us in the face. Is I have this irrigation pivot out by Strathmore, and when we started this company back 6 years ago, I had bought this piece of land, and ultimately it's a 220 acre piece. It wanted to confirm the people that, hey, A, phosphorus deficiency is real. B, rock phosphate, if you actually blend it with the right scenario, which we'll talk about later, and right biology, actually becomes just as available as monoammonium phosphate. And really, C is that I don't lose efficiency or yield. And really, the sidebar that happened out of this whole trial was what happens with the soil health. And I'll get into that too as we go. But it's something that really snuck up on us and went, "Hokey Dinah, this makes a big difference when you start actually playing that balanced diet and work on soil health." But as you can see with this, what I did on this trial was ultimately create two different trial strips. So the trial two really green trial strips. So this happens to be barley, and this would be my third year of already this trial. So year one, what we ended up doing is we had these strips where the check was zero phosphorus applied, and we're talking zero. So nothing at the seed placement, nothing anywhere. And we balanced the rest of the nutrition. I put on boron, I put on copper, I put everything so that way, everything that plant would call for. So that way, the only piece that would be the rate determining factor in the growth curve of these plants was going to be phos deficiency. And so year one, what we did is we did a trial where the strip was, zero phosphorus on those strips that you see. Then we did a strip of MAP at 34 pounds per acre on the map, and then we did our rebuilder strips at which was 017, 012 at 200 pounds because then it equates out the same of 34 pounds of actual. So ultimately, year one, it was a wheat crop. Put it on there. We went and harvested it. It went to 110 bushels to an acre, pin to pin. Didn't matter what my trial strip was. I
Mhm.
go, well, that sucks. There's nothing happening here. This sucks. I didn't gain anything, and away we go. And we're doing all this trial data and having everything down there. So that was year one. Going, okay, well, let's try it again. Year two, I put on peas. And same scenario, it went 86 bushels pin to pin. It did not matter whether or not I had zero phos map or rebuilder on this thing.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of getting a little frustrated because here I've spent now 2 years of my life, flagging out this thing, and I see zero phos deficiency. And if I'm actually a phos salesman, or a fertilizer guy, which I am, I'm going, well, shoot, nobody needs this stuff, although we know better. So then year three is what we see here right now. So this was the barley side of it all. And what happened is a couple different things. Was A, that delayed maturity that we're talking about ended up taking effect. So when we're looking at the delayed maturity, if you hit your clicker again, it'll actually pop up on there.
Oh,
So
there we
you
go.
got the no FOS check, and then you throw one more click on that. Basically you have 9 days of maturity difference already, but it took me 3 freaking years. And you can imagine the amount of mining I had to do between year one and year two to actually finally get to this.
Mhm.
So when I say it creeps up on you, it creeps up on you. I mean, you'd never know. And the whole scenario of this, the no FOS check, when I did it with the independent agronomist and we did the checks at the end, that barley ended up going 108 bushels to an acre. So in the area that year, that was average or better for anybody on a pivot.
Mhm.
And of course, the guy and then everything else ended up going 100 and almost 120 bushels to an acre. And so then, of course, my agronomist buddy, he say you need FOS. Then I actually just looked at him and I said, like Lyle. Well, I mean, why not Lyle? It wasn't there, but I'm going, I'm saying, like, man, oh man, if I didn't have these checks here, would you actually know that I had a FOS deficiency, and would you be not proud of the 110 bushels that we just did on the thing? He
Yeah,
goes,
probably wouldn't have.
yeah, and he wouldn't have noticed. And there was no signs other than the fact that having it side by side with our FOS side, the only sign was maturity. That's a little bit of a lie. The other sign that actually happened that was very, very noticeable, and I don't have the picture on my slide deck, but which was insanely noticeable, and I can't explain 100% why, but we had a massive amount of thistle and wild oats in the no FOS check, and it was night and day on those strip lines,
Hmm. Be able
and
to
just
access
crazy.
deeper material, right? Especially in the case of Canada thistle.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if that's what it is, or if it's a symptom of FOS deficiency. I mean, nobody's been able to really tell me. Everybody says, "Well, it's less pressure on the seed." And I'm going, "Well, less pressure. It's still in 110 bushels to an acre. So what's less pressure?" You
Yeah.
know. So it was one of those conversations. So I mean, I can stop here if anybody's got questions on this thing on this. I mean, we're going to go a little bit further into this and then get into the products, but if they've seen things like this in their own fields, but of course you wouldn't if you have done the same scenario all the way across. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it just kind of sneaks up on you, like the 5-year-old kid that grandma didn't see for a year, right?
Yeah. Usually what I hear in the fall is, guys saying, why did my crop mature faster than my neighbor's kind of thing? Like, why is, like, we both seeded it the same day, but his wheat is staying green and mine's already in the bin. What's going on? You know, not, his crop looks bad or there's no visual deficiency symptoms. It just takes a lot longer to mature.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's one of the things. We've had these times over the past. I mean, how many people in this room have blamed the smoke from 3 years ago that they wait delayed maturity, or cold spring because of delayed maturity, or bad canola seed because of delayed maturity, or bad pop up. I think there's an underlying problem that exists on a lot of these fields that could be a combination, obviously, but I think there is an overall underlying problem that happens with it. So
Yep.
move on to the next one. And it's just a real, so the year four went and put canola in those same trials, and then it was like kind of the canary in the mine shaft. Uh, that's the exact same day picture between no FOSS application. I mean, we're 14 days behind already
Oh,
on the
yeah.
same day of so we move to the next one too. There again, it really comes out in canola. Same strips. You're basically way behind in maturity, and away we go. The the reason we did this, so now all of a sudden I'm sitting in there and I'm going, everybody's going, okay, well, Neil, this is 4 years. You're already cycling your rock phosphate. This doesn't work still, or you need to be doing this for 4 years before you can get away with it, and so on and so forth. So what we did, and I'll get into these trials a little bit further, but on this zero FOS deficiency strip that you see right there is I go, well, why wouldn't I not be able to do a small plot trial now on this where I'm actually comparing our rebuilder formula, map, and zero check all on the same side? I'm going to know whether I was available year one or not. And so then I can prove my hypothesis on, hey, putting these combination of ingredients together along with biology actually works as good or better than chemistry. So
Mhm.
we'll continue on that, go from there. But this is, yeah, I mean, that's just what happens with FOS deficiency, and it just turns into something that's something that will sneak up on you folks. And of course, nobody's going to put zero phosphorus on, but I think over time, just because we've been in theory, just bringing more out than we're putting back in, that mass balance is going to turn on us one day. So we got to figure out, how do we put more phos into the soil? How do we balance that back out? Quick thing on regenerative fertilizers, and again, I don't want to get put into the same realm as regenerative or anything. I mean, 99% of the product that we sell out there, which I think was about 400,000 acres this year, went on to commercial farms. So regenerative fertilizers are an overside thing. It's just making healthier soil. And, things happen when you make a healthier soil. It's no different than if I'm feeding my gut. If I go and have something kind of bug come and hit me, We hit it with some probiotics, we increase the gut flora, and the next thing you know, we're back into healthy. We can actually stave off more disease and so on and so forth. And that's really the overall thought process of how we've developed these fertilizers. The
Hmm.
next one.
Yeah, regenerative definitely seems to be the current buzzword in the industry for sure.
Well, and I guess talking about that, and this is where I don't want people to get scared, because the most of the buzzwords, you'll see the Gabe Browns of the world, great proponent, but they starting to go and push regenerative into a thought process where guys need to go put their chickens on the corner of a field or a pig or a cow and have it go and crap in the corner and make sure that you have X amount of cover crops and to actually fit the mantra of regenerative.
Mm.
And I think as an overall conversation, we can't let that happen because it doesn't make sense in all applications, and we can't go and do that.
Yeah,
So we got to be able to just understand how to, and for me, I think it's as simple as regenerative means you just had got better.
yeah.
Sustainable is a bad word. I hate it. Sustainable means you're kind of staying status quo. And hear that one all the time too, and everybody loves that. Hey, it's sustainable. Well, that means we stayed at status quo. We didn't get better. We didn't get worse. It's just this. Regenerative means we probably bumped it from this to this. And I
Mm.
think that's as long as we just put that in our crosshairs instead of saying, "Hey, I don't want to be doing the cross fencing and all the cover cropping and I just think of it as how do I make it a little bit better."
Yeah,
So
every area is going to be different, right? What you're able to do. Cover cropping, for example, doesn't work great in our area. We just don't have enough time after harvest.
no, fair enough. And I'll give an example of this. It was interesting. I was in Prince Edward Island at the end of October, and every place has its different spots. And Prince Edward Island, as we all know, has this major thing called potato growing. And one of the potato growing processors out there ended up saying that thou shalt do some cover cropping. And when I went out in the end of October, every every crop out or every chunk of land out there was green and probably about this high of either winter peas, fall rye, some sorghum, or tillage radish, and every one of them had this across there, but it worked there. They have a longer growing season that goes. They have some moisture in the fall, and it made a lot of sense to avoid soil erosion in the spring. So,
Mhm.
you know, not always does it work. You can go out there and visualize and go, "Hey, I want to come back into Lethbridge and do the same thing." Yeah, probably not the way to actually play. We can try it a little bit, but I don't know if it works 100%. Right?
Yeah, not great.
There you go. I mean, has anybody in this room tried any cover cropping, or do you know of some guys that have tried it, Lau?
Mm, not that I can see. I mean, we have done a few, like one of my customers will quite often do a second crop of, oats on a feedlot for, a late crop of silage, or we'll do some forage brassicas for some late season cattle grazing. But that's not really meant to be a cover crop. It's more just some extra feed kind of thing. So, but it does work. Some of those brassicas can actually be quite frost tolerant.
Yeah, no doubt. So I don't know. Maybe it's worth trying in a few spots. You can just throw some. Really, I mean, depending on which combine you're using, you probably just let
Mhm.
your canola seed grow after. Anyway,
Mhm.
um, don't do a burn off every fall. You just let it go because guess what? Frost will get it, folks.
Yeah.
Um, Ultimately, we'll nail her. But anyway, our solution, and again, we're going to concentrate more on the rebuilder piece of this thing. It's just made of this chunk of rock phosphate. So instead of me and our group taking off just the phosphorus in this, we're actually keeping all of the nutrients, being the calcium, the magnesium, iron, and keeping it in a form that is mineral form. It is not water soluble as it sits, and basically making all those nutrients available throughout the growing season to give you a more nutrient dense final product when it's actually all said and done. So that's what we're actually trying to do. Go to the next one. How it actually works And here's the question. Everybody's probably going like, Neil, you've just been telling us rock phosphate's been useless to a plant, which it is. Elemental sulfur is the same way, useless to a plant as it is, completely useless. So why in the heck are you putting two useless to the plant pieces together and saying that this stuff works? Well, it goes back into that how you make MAP. If you actually have these things in small particle size, so what we do in our granulation plant is we physically knock them down to about a 200 micron size. We'll grind everything down to that, which is about the size of your hair particle. So in a 2 millimeter chunk of granule, you've got millions and millions of particles of rock phosphate, elemental sulfur, and compost that are all together. And the compost is there for a variety of reasons, including holding our microbes, which then basically do all the release work. So if you actually think about it, what would the surface area of a little 2 millimeter granule be, Lyle? I mean, if you had that many microbes, micron size in there, just take a relative guess on how far that surface area would be. Because if you surface area here, of course, it's just that.
Yeah.
So you maybe are, what would you be? 10, maybe a meter worth of surface area altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe say like a square foot or two. Yeah.
Yeah, of surface area. Whereas if I put in that same granule, like millions and millions of wee little 200 micron particles, what would you suggest the surface area is on that?
Well, it gets huge. The smaller the particle, the more surface area in proportion.
100%. So just for thought process, it's well over 2 kilometers
Yeah. Yeah.
on that same, just for a 2 millimeter thing. So you got well over 2 kilometers. So you can imagine the mighty amount, or the amount of microbes that can attack the surface of that end of things. So that's one of the main reasons we micronize. The other side is, like you say, in the soil particle, because the other side that I get all the time from agronomists, Lyle's no different, folks. They say, Neil, Foss is it's a great idea. You guys go put it on the surface, and then you're saying it's actually mobile in the soil. Because we all know that Boss isn't mobile in the soil, especially when we haven't been putting a whole bunch on. Unless, of course, you overdo Boss, it's like anything else, it becomes mobile if you overdo it. But if you don't, how does it get down to that plant root? And so the other piece of micronization is, like you see in this little visual beside, is because I'm 200 microns, I'm actually smaller than the soil pores of most soil structure. So when you get a rain event, those little chunks of granule actually ping pong down through the soil pores and do the pinball effect to a point where all of a sudden, wherever the microbe actually attacks that piece is where then it becomes available to the plant. So that's really the two main reasons we micronize. We'll move
Yeah.
on to the next one.
Yeah. And a conventional map might be more likely to tie up in that soil and therefore not move that way, right? It's just binding
Oh,
right into that pore
100%.
space.
Well, and going into that end of things, it goes into the whole reason MAP is there is because you've knocked off that phosphorus off of the calcium, magnesium, iron, and so all of a sudden, or clay, depending on what happens to be the makeup. So all of a sudden, if you put it on top, the surface, and this is why the agronomists are 100% right when you're using chemical phos, is when it's water, all of a sudden it's playing with its first dance partner as it moves into the soil profile.
Mhm.
And so if we've been short, especially if we've been short on phosphorus over the last 20, 30 years, because we've been slowly gaining, not gaining on it, is its first dance partner happens to be a chunk of clay or a chunk of calcium that is sitting there going, I need somebody to have a little bit of binding with, right? And
Mhm.
so that's why they say there is stratification on the top, and they're 100% right.
Yep.
So there is a little bit of a different mantra on when you're talking about a mineral source and why we micronize versus a chemical source. Does that make
Mhm.
sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. So there's our combination. We'll end up doing this. What's really interesting about this and the reason it works is through the microbial side. And I know Lyle had some questions on, there's a lot of claims in the world of microbial action and, essentially probiotics for the soil. And there's been a lot of research done on these where, one, two bugs will come in and of course, do they actually play nice with the bugs that are already there? It's no different than us going into our kids going into school, and not everybody plays nice in the sandbox, right?
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
something happens, right?
Yeah. So, for example, for you guys, if you were watching like the Lethbridge Agronomy update here a couple of weeks ago, they had a researcher on there who was saying that of applied biologicals, usually less than 5% of biologicals survive after the application. Now, I didn't think at the time to ask him, but I'm assuming that that was probably in a liquid application. But yeah, that was very interesting nonetheless because, of course, a lot of these companies, the marketing is quite different from what this guy was finding. So I would think that, I mean, Neil, now that we've got the biomakers report and stuff from you guys, and, with the volume of the compost or the feedstock that it's going down with, I would think that we should be able to do better than 5% survivability on your microbes.
Oh, and they do, and this is what's really unique about our product is I'm not trying as I mentioned in the onset of this conversation, folks. I'm an animal nutritionist by trade. So when I sit there and I think about it, it's the same scenario. Whereas if you have a balanced diet, I never ever introduce just one bug into a chicken pellet or a chicken gut through the water. It's insanity.
Hmm.
What would you cause with chaos, right? So why would we do the same thing in the soil? Because if you actually think of this, and I mean, I've used this analogy in Poor Lisle, and whoever's heard me before, I use this analogy a lot. But the world's largest feedlot, in theory, is the top 6 inches of soil. Because we're talking trillions and trillions of microbes that are in there. And I just, especially any of those of us who have livestock on this call, and most of us have probably been through the barns and understand that with that livestock, it's the balanced nutrition. Otherwise, things get sick. It's the same thing with that top 6 inches of soil. If we don't balance this thing out and feed it nothing but meat and potatoes, and then hit it with a consistent nut of antibiotics, it's not going to end well. And we just got to think of it as being that feedlot. And as soon as we do, I think it changes the way we start to think. I don't know if that makes any sense as an analogy, Lyle, but
Yeah, I think so.
fair enough. All right, we'll go on to the next one here. Same thing. I just went through this with the probiotic and stuff. We'll move on to the next slide. But yeah, this is where it's interesting. Is recently the one thing that we've been doing is as I showed you those pictures before, and what really became apparent on the microbial resilience that actually happens was when that picture that I showed you on our canola crop, where I had that trial going, is when I was doing those pictures. It was a bad Lagus year for everybody in the area. And I was standing in the middle of that field. And this is anecdotal, but I've seen it also in a whole bunch of my clients that have been using the product for X amount of years. But as I was standing in the middle of the field, specifically on that day, there was actually two spray planes going around on my neighbors nailing Lagus. I go and I look on there, and the only thing I had was ladybugs. So it was quite interesting in there. I mean, I attracted the guys who get rid of the Lagus by default because you're doing something, and we didn't have a single pressure of a problem while everybody else is spraying directly around me. So the fact that we'll get into it a bit here, but what we did is we actually tried to figure out how do I keep the microbial population alive in my granule through the process? Because that's one of the hardest things. I don't want to nuke them. I don't want to pasteurize them. I can put them in there. How do I keep them alive? And how do I keep them alive for a long time? So that's been most of what we've been playing with as a patent over the last 3-4 years on our product is making this happen. And so this report was pretty cool. We went and sent it over to a lab down in Sacramento, California, that actually did this B crop analysis, which then, as the actual identifiable in their system DNA species, was over 1,000 species in that little granule you see there that stayed alive. And this was after 6 months of granulation. So we had granulated in May and sent this product away in October and got this kind of resilience, and they were all still alive. So it's pretty cool stuff. Move on to the next one.
Just a point of comparison, there's other granular microbial products out there that have fewer strains than that. And
Yeah,
this
like
was
five,
not
six.
designed from the
Yeah,
ground up to be a biological. This is primarily a fertilizer.
yeah. And so what we're doing is we're feeding the fertilizer. So it goes back into that balanced nutrition. You have this massive diversity. It's not only just microbe or bacterial, but it's also fungal. We're hearing lots of talk about different fungus and stuff like this, and the fact that we're running low on them there. Everybody knows mycorrhizae, and that's the big word of the day. But at the same side of it all, there's a lot of good funguses and a lot of good bacteria out there. And if you actually let them all play, don't get me wrong, there's always bad guys in this. The bad guys have no choice if the good guys are outnumbering them. It's kind of like that bully in the corner. As long as everybody goes and nails him, he keeps in line, right?
Hmm.
So it's the scenario of that. So long-term soil health is required. You need this requirement of both a fungal and a bacterial population, and they need to balance out. So I've got some names on there. Doesn't mean anything to anybody, which is fair. So what I did is I went to the next slide, and I'm not going to go and talk through all these. I sent Lyle a little flyer that actually has all this in it. It's just a little page thing which he'll send out to anybody who is actually invited on this, just as a sidebar if you're interested on what they do. But at the end of the day, what happens is when you start doing this, these funguses, these bacteria that we've actually have living in our product do really, really good stuff in the soil.
Hmm.
Next. So now it goes into what Lyle was saying. Do they actually survive and do they do anything in the soil? And so this is where we then moved into a different scenario. And the same Biomaker guys, we were doing um, soil testing, the same scenario as what we did with the product testing, but we did it on those strips that I was talking about. And not only those strips, we did it also in strips in Saskatchewan. We did it on strips in northern Alberta, just to make sure that it reacts the same. But I'll just talk about more of the stuff about my facility at that point. So I was taking product from that zero phosphorus strip. I was taking soil from that MAP strip. I was also taking soil from our rebuilder strip. And we were able to actually then identify the microbes that were actually growing and the differences in this end of things. And it ended up being some pretty cool stuff, including, increased transport of, like I say, manganese is big.
Hmm.
I'm not going to get into it today a whole bunch, but there's all these little micronutrients that help different enzymatic pathways. Manganese being one of them, and manganese being one of the major things that actually gets tied up by glyphosate.
Yep. And it's
You know,
critical for photosynthesis, amongst other things. Yep.
100%. And so the same thing with these phytohormones. And I'm not going to get high tech on anybody today with this, the salicylic acid or the ABAs of the world or anything like that. But trust me, folks, they all are required for different synthesis pathways. And if you balance it, it's just that whole thing that I kind of keep on dwelling on: balance, balance, balance.
Hmm.
Go next. So here's an interesting thing. So if you actually take a look, and this is my little bubble thing. So when Biomaker sends me back the report, they have this little interactive bubble scenario on their website. And so each one of those little circles inside these overall circle represents in the case of the blue, a fungus, and in the case of the orange, a bacteria. And I can go and hover over above that with my cursor, and it'll actually tell me which one it is. Of course, the larger the circle there, and it's a great visual effect, the larger the circle, the more of that abundance of that one specific organism is. So it gives you a pretty good visual of this. So what's the main thing you see here, Lyle, that's the difference between the map side of it and the rebuilder side?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that one has more different bubbles than another, but you can see with the rebuilder, we have a better balance, I would say. Like we don't have one huge big dominant strain. We have lots more that are more in balance.
Yeah, and that's true. And really, I mean, you can't tell the bubbles, but because there's so many smaller ones and stuff, it's actually a lot more in the uniqueness. And I'll go to the next slide on that. But when you get to, and I won't get there yet, but here's what happens if you actually cluster them off. Actually, we will get the next one. As you cluster them off, this is how I can actually text. So the one circle here, folks, is the check, which had zero FOSS. The other one is the map, which had, of course, map, and then the other one was the rebuilder. You can see the different clusters. So cluster two was our rebuilder. It had in that little circle 102 organisms. that were readily identifiable in any kind of volume as you went into the different organisms there. So then when I cross-referenced these organisms that were actually unique or in those things, and this is where it's interesting, is they then cross-referenced into the same organisms that we had in the product at the beginning stage. So my survivability is unbelievable. They almost 100% across the board. We're all sitting in there, and away we go. So if you share, I mean, if you give me a share for a second, which I think you did, I'm going to just go and again, lots of stuff that's not going to be. I'll just replace the current one here for a second, Lyle.
Yep.
But here's just a for instance. And again, none of it means anything to you folks, nor does it mean mostly to me either until you actually really dive and are really bored and need to really get some boring sleep time information. But when they do the Biomaker side of it all, here's all the different specific species that go. And we're talking, I'll go on and on and on and on and on. And it goes anywhere from a thiobacillus, which, if anybody knows, elemental sulfur is what ends up going to everything else. So it's pretty cool. You can share back your way.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't actually share that, did I?
Oh, well, I didn't see it on my end. I just
Oh,
assumed.
there we go. I'll share there now. There we go. Look at this. There we go. So here's all the different microbes that they actually identify, in their abundance, so on and so forth. I mean, here you go. Like I say, there's different bacilluses, there's different everything, and again, it's a whole collaboration. But it's pretty cool on what stays surviving and then what we have in our different side of things. I can stop sharing now and you can go back.
Okay. Can you see mine again?
Just your mug, man.
Alrighty.
There we go. So what was interesting here is you have the different organisms found. And so not only did we, and again, this is just over a 1 year's period when you change this. So when I'm talking, you can be regenerative in 1 year. This was actually only over a 6 week period from T0 to T6 or just T6 weeks. So it's amazing how quick the population of microbes changes. And what was really interesting in this, I could bring anybody to that field today. So anybody on this call or anybody that on this call wants to see this in the middle of summer, I still have those checks. I can take you over there with a shovel, and I won't tell you where those checks are, or the map, or our product. And we'll go in with a spade, and you'll be able to tell which one's which. The map is, honest to goodness, as hard when I go and try and put the shovel on there. It's as hard as this table. I've got my thing on. It has zero earthworms in it, and it's just the root ball system is smaller. I go into the rebuilder side, I can dig in there, it goes in like butter, and I have a whole plethora of earthworms that pops out. And so it's very easy to see, and like I say, it's happened now for 5 years in a row where it's just not an anomaly. And it's been really fun to watch, to be brutally honest. So it doesn't take long to become regenerative. Go to the next one. So that field trial design, so you're going, okay, Neil, that's all great. You brought all these microbes in there to do this. What really matters is to make sure that if I do use your stuff, I don't lose any kind of yield. And that's the main thing. And I don't blame you. I'd be the same way. And this is how it ended up going. So what we ended up doing is that strip is we did a field trial design where I needed to prove to everybody that we were available day one, no different than MAP. And so here you can see the C's are the checks. The M is the map and the R is the rebuilder. If you can just notice, just even by the overall drone picture, check was horribly behind, and map and rebuilder were the same. We can go next. At the end of the day, this is what it ended up being. We didn't lose anything. In fact, we actually gained on some of these. I also then tested the theory to make sure that we did some in-furrow versus actually broadcast to ensure to people that, hey, if I'm broadcasting, I want to put some FOSS on in the fall or the spring before all this, that it's actually going to get there, need to prove this out. So we did some in-furrow trials and also broadcast trials with the rebuilder, and you can see what happened there.
And of course, this is on irrigation, so water isn't necessarily a problem. So it should have good
Yeah,
good breakdown and good usage.
yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, it ended up working well. We did a bunch of trials with the company independently wise out of Kendersley, Saskatchewan here a few years back. Same scenario where we were doing wheat and some canola. Canola is always the canary, so it really shows well on all these things. And this just happened to be just outside, there where you see the difference in what happened. You know, ultimately the product becomes available right away. And just the whole biology of it all. And if you remember the main reasoning, so when I go and I scrolled through all of those different microbes from our product, the main thing that happens is when your rock phosphate sits beside a chunk of whether it's elemental sulfur or iron or anything else like that, there's little microbes that actually what they call solubilize certain nutrients.
Mhm.
And in that solubilization phase, they create a organic acid. So whether that happens to be a gluconic acid, a acetic acid, a citric acid, a lot of us have heard the citric acid thing. These different acids that happen, they all sit at about a pH of about 4.4. And what becomes available at 4.4, Lau?
Well, just about everything. Phosphate.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. So, Mother Nature did a great job of making sure that all these solubilizing bacteria and fungi actually create the same kind of 4.4 organic acid on a consistent basis. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, everything that you're sitting there is tied up in the soil profile or in my rock phosphate or becomes available because you've just solubilized them with these different acids.
Mhm.
And it happens during different stages of the crop. But guess when it happens the most?
Yeah. Right in the growing season.
Yeah, I mean, by default, the most biological activity in your soil happens during when the plant needs the nutrients the most. Again, Mother Nature, we try and thwart her every once in a while, but really, she got it figured out, and it's pretty funny. A little bit of a digression. We take a look at the Amazon rainforest, for instance, and everybody tries to figure out, well, where's the phos and that whole nutrient cycling come from? And I saw a really, really interesting documentary on the way that Moroccan phosphorus actually, because Morocco's main area of the world, of course, is a desert. It's sand. It's in the middle of the desert over there. And when the great big winds come from that side of the world during certain season, it blows up a whole bunch of dust particles, which happen to be phosphate
Hmm.
into the atmosphere. And it was neat. They showed the NASA picture of this little cloud of phosphorus that goes over top of the Atlantic Ocean. And guess where it landed?
Right in the Amazon rainforest.
Right in the Amazon rainforest. And so it's pretty interesting. Again, Mother Nature does some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
Going to the
absolutely.
next one. Just kind of touch on a little bit of disease. I mean, I touched on it a little bit with the Lagus and the fact that we were bringing in ladybugs and so on and so forth. But it's no different than fungicides. I mean, we sit there and we've been starting to get trained to go and do a half rate of fungicide all through the season. And the same thing, I'll always analogize it to human nutrition or animal nutrition in general. But it's really the same thing as us just taking a half rate of antibiotics all the time, just in case.
Hmm.
Eventually, what's going to happen?
Yeah, you get me. Well, you build resistance.
Build resistance. And what are we seeing nowadays in our cropping systems?
Resistance to everything.
Yeah. So, if we just start following the yellow brick road on what's going, we don't have to think too far on what we've actually kind of created here and why it's happened. Instead of actually creating a whole new system to actually battle that next resistance, let's try and actually balance this thing out so we battle it naturally through the good fungus. Because the problem when you do a fungicide is not only do you take out the bad guy, you take out all the good guys. It
Hmm.
doesn't care who it's attacking. And ultimately, that's one of the scenarios on how everything becomes released. So, um, again, I'm not a greenie, folks. I really not. I honestly am an animal nutritionist, and it's just I keep looking at what we used to do on the Saskatchewan farm. We didn't have all these things. I mean, obviously, it didn't grow we didn't grow massive crops and the genetics weren't quite this high, but we didn't have this fungus pressure back in the early 80s.
Mhm.
A lot of things that we're seeing today just didn't exist. But yet we try and fix for the next problem, whether it's clubroot, whether it's, what are the other ones out there, Lyle, that we're always trying to fix for?
Oh, blackleg and sclerotinia and fusarium and everything else.
Yep. And so if we start doing that, you just get into a cycle where, holy cow, we're just trying to defeat this guy, but yet we're still nuking the bad guy or the good guy. So
Mhm.
I,
Absolutely.
there's my little soapbox conversation on this one.
Yeah.
Okay. And really, that's the summary. I mean, we're sitting here at the end. We're up on the hour. We can definitely take questions, or if anybody's got other questions. Hopefully, I didn't go through it too fast, but didn't want to bring too many things other than phosphorus needs, folks. It really does help with your balance. I mean, when you take a look at an AL&L lab report, they always have a phos to something ratio on it. They always have a K to something ratio. The reason there's a ratio is because they always talk about balances. And if we don't have those balances, guess what? The next guy doesn't be able to work.
Yeah.
And so there is something to all those lab analysis. It's just a matter of understanding what they mean.
Yeah. I guess one thing we could go over too is application. I think, some of these guys are pretty familiar with your product, but I'm not sure if all of them are. So, I mean, for those of you that aren't familiar, Rebuilder does come in a granulated form. And Kelly told me this morning we do have access to some tons of that as far as going into a seed drill right into the seed row for maximum usability, basically. But generally, we're using the blended form and we're applying that at, somewhere in the realm of 200 to 400 pounds per acre, and it's being applied through a lime spreader.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And then the bonus here with this product is, like I said, you can put it as a top dress. You can put it as a broadcast material in the fall. It doesn't go away with the runoff because it's a mineral nutrient. It's not, it isn't a piece like that. So this is how it goes. And then on the side of it all, the reason you can put it down beside your seed, you can put it in a seed place, you can put it in your side boot, it doesn't matter. But the reason being is it has zero, especially the rebuilder. I mean, anything with potash has a salt index. It has to because potash is a salt. But at the end of the day, when you're talking our straight rebuilder product, it really doesn't have any salt index because I haven't gone through any chemical reaction.
Yeah.
So that's why this end is working. So just to reiterate, we have a few thousand ton available this spring that's still available for anybody who wants to, get some down the boot, whether they want to go and put some as a top dress as an overall side. It does work well, folks, and it seems to really push the disease product or disease pressure away.
Yeah. Well, and like I said earlier at the start, I've been using this product now on some of my customers' fields for a few years, and I've definitely seen the results from it, and I'm a big fan of it. It's one of my favorite products, and just the fact that even just that blended product, getting that down, in the winter ahead of seeding, now you don't have to worry about having a full tank of phosphate and, 3 more truckloads a day of fertilizer at seeding time. You can drop that rate right down. Lots of my guys just do 10 to 20 pounds of product with a phosphate product in the seed row just for a starter, and then let the replenish take care of most of the rest of the phosphate needs.
Well, it's a great way to do a builder. I mean, good point on that. I mean, if we're sitting in there and we know that the 25 to 30 pounds that we've been putting on is getting deep, it isn't keeping up, you can still do the 10 to 15 pounds of MAP or S15 or whatever you do, just for that quick chemical pop up. Because there is one caveat to this, and I will tell folks this, is biology doesn't like cold weather.
Hmm.
So if you're all of a sudden planting in 4 to 6 degree temperatures in your field, the biology that actually releases phosphate doesn't like to wake up until it hits about 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. So that little caveat of throwing a little chemical fertilizer at the very beginning is always worthwhile just to make sure you don't get stung on that. But at the end of the day, once that soil temperature hits that 10 to 12 degrees, then we're off to the races with the biology.
Yeah, like most guys in our area are going to start seeding their cereals when ground temperature is somewhere around 5 degrees. Most of them will start before that. And at
Yep.
that point, under 5 degrees, soil biology not going to be very active yet. It's just
It's
not.
not very awake,
Yeah.
man. No.
Hmm. Anybody have any questions at all? You've been a
I think
pretty
Ruben
quiet
had
bunch.
one there. He was, I think, maybe I was
Yeah,
wrong.
Ruben asked how it compares to H start.
Well,
H start, H start. Oh, you know what, Kelly, you may know better than me because you know that product better than us.
Yeah, well, basically the I think the biggest difference there. So H start is a great product. It's essentially the same compost or very similar compost to what is in the Replenish product. H start takes that compost and they pelletize it to make the application process simpler. So the difference between the two products, quite blatantly, is HStart brings that biological package to the field to help release nutrients that you currently have tied up in your soil, whereas and makes it available to the plant to use. Whereas the Replenish product does all of that, but also brings macro and micronutrient package along with it. So that's probably the primary difference between the two. The biology in both products is actually relatively similar, and HStart does have some really good documentation from biomakers as well.
yep.
Yep,
Yeah, and
that's a good explanation.
one
Yep.
of the big differences would be, like the Humaterra, typically our application rate is going to be much lower than, say, 200 pounds of replenish, right? So even like this year now, we're down to, what is it, 20 pounds, I believe, on dryland for single application. So, we're just not putting as much compost or biology down as we would be with replenish or restore. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. The application rates are a little lower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, hopefully that cleans up for you, Lyle, and you can get her out on the web, and anybody who missed this can actually get, hopefully get some education out of it.
Yeah, hopefully. I think I think the warmest day we've had for at least a week, so probably a lot of guys were out doing chores or other things around the farm. But I will make sure to remove everybody's names and stuff from the video, and yeah, I'll share it out on YouTube so other people can catch up with it later. So thank you very much, Neil, and Kelly as well, although you were quiet for most of it. And always good to see you guys and chat with you. And Neil, you're always an interesting one to learn from. Probably one of the most interesting guys to talk about fertilizer in the industry, I think. You definitely are good at keeping guys engaged.
All right, appreciate that, man.
Yeah, thanks, Lyle. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. So, okay. Well, I guess that'll be it for this meeting then. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And we will be back next Friday at 9 a.m. And I'm going to have Andrew from Stoller or Corteva Canada here to talk about some of their new biologicals and biostimulants for the year. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys next week.
Thanks,
Yep.
guys.
Thanks,
Thanks, man.
guys.
Yeah.